As a fan of the mystery genre, modern whodunits scare me. There's only so much you can do with this type of story, and it seemed for a time that all of the options were exhausted. Have the murderer be the person that you most suspect, which is boring, the person that you least suspect, which worked for a while but then became the most obvious answer, so that really left you with
Phyllis, aka Beatrix Bourbon, the person I most medium suspect.
But in 2019, along came a modern whodunit that defied all expectations, and that movie was Knives Out. Now, over the last couple years, I've found myself rewatching this movie pretty frequently, and what I've found out is that I f***ing love this movie. I seem to only grow more fond of it with each rewatch, and I feel like that's almost the point of the movie, because with each viewing I catch a new detail or aspect that I missed the previous time around. So if you've only ever seen this movie once and went, yeah, it was pretty good I guess, I don't really blame you, because that's exactly what I thought after my first viewing. But after watching other murder mystery movies, both new and old, I've gained a massive respect for the writing of Knives Out. This movie takes the formula of each murder mystery movie you've seen before, twists it on its head, giving you more answers than questions, only to pull the rug out from under you and tell you that you were right the whole time, kind of. So in this video, I'm going to be analyzing the story of Knives Out, pointing out some clues that you missed the first time around, and talking about why this is one of my all-time favorite movies. So get out your magnifying glasses, your donut holes, and let's frame our way into the story of Knives Out. So right away, we're introduced to the setting of the film, the Thrifty Mansion, which has the most immaculate vibes for a house ever. The decorations, the weird slanted doors and hidden staircases, and going along with the house is some of the most on-the-nose murder mystery music, and I absolutely love it. The scene ends when we see that Harlan Thromby, owner of the house, has seemingly been murdered. We meet our protagonist Marta and her family, who are living in some low-income housing, when Marta gets a call from the Thromby family saying the police have some more questions for her. She goes to the house, where the family is semi-welcoming to her, and then we go to the interviews with each family member. Through these interviews, we learn more about each family member, their relation to each other, and also more about the night that Harlan was killed. Also, seemingly at random, a man in the back presses on a piano key. Everyone eventually asks about him, and he's introduced as Benoit Blanc, a world-renowned private investigator. So first and foremost, I want to compliment the vibe that this movie has. The architecture of the house, the foggy grounds, and the overcast sky, all complemented by the music, is admittedly a huge reason why I love this movie. To me, it just has that it factor with the vibes, and I can't really get enough of it. But what makes these characters stick out to me is their humor. Some of the jokes or moments can really pass you by because of how quick they are and how little time they spend on each comedic moment. The whole movie is like this, and some jokes are more intended than others, but the humor is also very dry and at times very dark, but it makes me laugh every time and almost reminds me of the same kind of humor that The Office has.
You want dinner, Nana? Dinner? To eat? To eat?
So we see more of what happened that night and previous days, from varying different perspectives. Each family member seems to have something to hide, and also some sort of personal issue with Harlan, meaning that they all had a motive. After the interviews with the family are over, Blanc talks with the detectives, who wonder why they're here because this seems like a pretty open and shut case, but Blanc is convinced otherwise. He then talks with Marta, asking her questions about the family because he thinks that she has some more insight into this family from being Harlan's nurse. Blanc asks her some questions and finds answers because Marta can't lie without throwing up. He also says that he was hired for this case by somebody anonymously.
It makes no damn sense. Compels me though.
Marta seems exceedingly nervous, and at first glance it seems like she's just uncomfortable and sad about the situation, but upon second viewing there's of course another reason for this. Ana de Armas does such a great job in this role throughout the whole film, but I've come to appreciate her performance more on subsequent viewings because she plays the guilty party in a way that can be misconstrued as just uncomfortable with the situation and the whole family, and speaking of the family, she has every right to be uncomfortable around them. This family has the guise of being very close and friendly and inviting, but when the family members are alone with the detectives, they all, in one way or another, throw the other person under the bus. It becomes exceedingly clear that the only person that was holding this family together was Harlan, and not because he was the one that everybody liked, but because without him, each of them as individuals had nothing. But the scene introduces us to the whole Marta can't lie without puking detail, which is one of the things I love about Mystery, and this movie in particular, the details. This movie is filled with small details like this, and it's hard to catch the first time around, but everything is so carefully planned to fit and service the story like a puzzle. This might sound obvious when it comes from mystery stories, but sometimes watching a mystery unfold is like jamming a puzzle piece into the wrong slot just because it can fit. The detectives go through the timeline of the night Harlan was killed, how everybody's story matches up, and Harlan's time of death seemed to be around 2 a.m. We then get Marta's full sit-down interview and learn what really happened the night that Harlan was killed, how Marta accidentally gave him the wrong dose, which would end up being the death of him. After the flashback, Marta carefully tells her story in a way that still is the truth, but also pukes anyway. That night, they hold a remembrance for Harlan, and Marta is clearly shaken. We see in another flashback exactly how the family treated her, which is nice, but not really. Blanc then enlists Marta for her help to figure out the whole truth, because she's the only one who had nothing to gain from murdering Harlan, so clearly she must be innocent. Marta completes the flashback from that night, seeing that Harlan did actually use the knife himself, but also a drop of blood landed on her shoe. When we get the flashback of the truth, we see just how close Harlan and Marta really were, how Harlan has regrets for the way that he's raised his family, and how he wants to attempt to repair things with his remaining life. But we also see just how great of a mystery writer he is, giving Marta the plan for an alibi so that way her family doesn't get deported. And that's where one of the more controversial aspects comes into play. This movie has very heavy political themes throughout its runtime. Some would say it's woke, but I don't think that it's too over the top. The scene with the family around the fireplace is very on the nose, talking about Republicans and immigrants without directly naming anybody, and this shows some more divide in the family, but it's also a thing that's going to heavily age the movie in a few years. The point of the scene was to show us how the family truly treated Marta, so it accomplishes what it sets out to do in that regard, but also takes some time to talk about some very on-topic things from 2019. Lionsgate clearly knew this was going to be a politically divisive movie, so they even covered their asses when you watch the Blu-ray. I'm not one to sit down and talk politics, never have been, never will be, but I'll say that I can see why some people could be thrown off by scenes like this, but personally, with how it's handled in this film, I don't mind it. So the next day, Marta helps Blanc and the other detectives try to figure out the case, but she also has to cover her own tracks for the mistakes she made that night. So she has to mess with the tape. Her footprints are all over the mud, so she very smartly walks right through the mud several more times and has the dogs mess it up even more. But then there's the broken piece of the fence? I don't really know what to call this, so I'm just gonna say fence. Ransom then shows up for the will reading, and the whole family ends up fighting because Ransom's presence seems to incite chaos. They find out what Ransom and Harlan were talking about that night and how Ransom was cut out of the will, and the family very pretentiously looks down on him before they continue fighting. Despite Marta's best efforts, Blanc finds a clue, the broken piece of the fence, and then pieces together that somebody climbed through the window the night that Harlan died. The family gathers for the will reading. The man reads a message from Harlan that says this is for the best, and it seems like the will is only one page. Everything and anything that Harlan owned is passed over to Marta Cabrera. The family is confused and pissed off, all except for Ransom, who thinks the whole thing is hilarious. The family overwhelms Marta with questions, but her car doesn't work, but Ransom drives over and offers her an escape.
Okay, seriously though, what the hell?
Marta having to cover her own tracks is the first real distinction this movie has from other murder mysteries. We know the killer, but we also know the killer is a good person and didn't do this maliciously, so at this point we know what we're looking for, and we're hoping that Blanc doesn't find anything and that Marta can get away with it. This is a really great twist on the normal formula, but I remember thinking, how is all of this gonna take the whole movie? Usually the killer is revealed in the third act. There's a big revelation and a fight to take down the murderer, but that's clearly not gonna happen here, so where can the story actually go? Ransom offering Marta help is another great bit of misdirection. He's obviously the guiltiest party because of his and Harlan's conversation from that night, and he generally just seems like the worst member of the Thromby family, and that's saying something. But we know he's not guilty, and he offers Marta help, has a nice heart-to-heart conversation, and we think that maybe he's not the worst dude after all. But then he gives Marta a meal and forces her to tell him the whole story, and that's exactly what she does, and he seems like he genuinely wants to help her, but the scene has so many double meanings. I'll get to more on that in a little bit. The Thromby family is pissed about all their money being lended to Marta, so they talk about the only way to reverse the will, and that's if Marta is found guilty of killing Harlan, which seems awfully coincidental, or does it? Blanc is then turned to by the family as the hero if he can find out that Marta is guilty, so that way they can get their money back. The next morning, Marta's world is turned upside down because the news broke about the Thromby inheritance, so she leaves and runs into Walt, who first tries to convince her to give them back the inheritance, but she says no, so then he blackmails her with the information of her mother being an illegal immigrant. But she realizes that now she has all the resources to get out of the situation that they're in and slams the door in his face. Blanc then goes to see Nana, asking her for what she saw that night, hoping that she has the memory and coherence to remember it all. Marta gets a letter in the mail, a blackmail note of Harlan's toxicology report saying, "I know what you did." She goes to Ransom for help. They go to the toxicology lab, which would have the full report, but the whole building's been set on fire. Marta and Ransom plan to go and meet with the blackmailer, but go through a police chase, which ends up in Blanc catching them and arresting Ransom, per what Nana recalled that night of the murder. When Marta gets the blackmail letter, the whole mystery changes. This is also the change into the third act. The first act, we're learning about the case and the family. The whole second act, we really know the mystery and the information, but going into the third act, we're left clueless once again. This gives the audience a moment of reflection on the entire mystery, because up to this point, it really hasn't been a mystery. We've known every piece of information about the case. It's the police and Blanc that don't have all the information, so if there's a new piece that we're unaware of, it makes you think, what other information do we think we have, but is not actually there? Marta then goes to see the blackmailer, but finds Fran, the housekeeper, who's not doing so well and seems to say, "You did this." Marta calls an ambulance and comes clean to Blanc, but he already knows everything because Ransom told the police Marta's side of the story. The whole family gathers in the house because Marta wants to tell them the whole story from her own mouth. She hands Blanc the toxicology report, he reads it and interrupts the speech, saying that Marta is keeping the inheritance and they're all a bunch of
vultures at the feast, knives out, beaks bloody.
He said it! He said it!
Blanc explains the whole case and how Ransom is actually the guilty party. Marta gets a call, she says that Fran is alright, and then Ransom admits to her attempted murder and says that when he gets out of this, he's gonna make Marta's life hell. But then she throws up, and she says that she lied about Fran being alive, and Ransom just admitted to her murder. So then he tries to kill Marta, but thankfully it's a fake knife. Ransom is taken away. Blanc says that he knew about Marta's involvement from the very beginning because of the blood on her shoe, and Marta stands on the balcony of her new house, looking down on the family that was so used to looking down on her. So when Blanc puts all the pieces together, his strange personality and seemingly bad investigating all comes full circle. We kind of think that Blanc is not the greatest detective up to this point because he hasn't really done any uncovering. But when he puts together all the pieces of the case and finds the guilty party to actually be Ransom, our perception changes. But what makes this scene and this whole case in general so great is all the pieces that were there for us to figure out. It's not really spelled out for us, but with all the information presented, we could have figured it out. Let's go over it, shall we? Ransom is the prime suspect from the very beginning, even though that we think we have the answers and Marta is guilty. When the detectives go over the events of the night of Harlan's death, one point sticks out because it isn't brought up again in Marta's flashbacks: the dogs barking and waking up Meg. Who do we know that the dogs bark at? Ransom. Also in Marta's flashback, when she sees Nana, she says,
"Ransom? Are you back again already?"
Meaning that he must have just recently left, but Nana is also probably over 100 years old, so we could dismiss that. When Ransom arrives for the will reading, it's exposed that he already knows he's not in the will. It's not that big of a stretch to assume that he knew what was in the will. Oh, that is a stretch, you say? Alright, well, in Ransom and Harlan's last conversation together, Marta's name was brought up, but why would her name get brought up if it wasn't about the will? Ransom accidentally admits this when he says that Harlan said Marta is the only person who can beat him at Go. In this same scene, Ransom gets worried when Marta tells him that Blanc found muddy footprints coming through the window, and breathes a sigh of relief when she says they aren't traceable. Ransom also tells Marta that he worked as Harlan's research assistant for a summer, and that's how he knows all about blood toxicology reports and how they work. So I suppose he could also know about the different medicine supplements, but the most damning piece of evidence is the anonymous hiring of Blanc, and the only way to reverse the will is with a guilty verdict of Marta. The only person who knew about the contents of the will before they were read aloud to the family was Ransom. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, and that's not even everything. I left out all the evidence from the third act, and Hugh did this, mostly because I actually think all the stuff in the third act isn't really that necessary. It raises the stakes a bit, but even the whole revelation scene, I feel like is almost a bit over-explained. Maybe it's just incredibly thorough, but it's like they have Ransom pegged as a conspirator, and then it continues on to the stuff that they can actually convict him for. Might just be a me thing, but I feel like the revelation is almost too much stuff. So Ransom was the suspect that we first thought of, but the movie does everything it can to convince you otherwise, even showing us what we presumed was the accidental murder. But then Blanc explains everything, and while it was definitely possible to come to the conclusion yourself with the evidence that we were presented, it's unlikely that we would've, and it's cool to see just how great of a detective Blanc actually is. The ending scene is so incredibly satisfying, knowing that the family will have to fend for themselves, Marta and her family are going to be set for generations, and Harlan is finally happy in his portrait. While this movie is called a whodunit, it's not really a whodunit. We have one prime suspect, Ransom, and when we're told that it isn't him, we have the supposed killer, the protagonist, as the person that we're rooting for. And in the end, we find out that the prime suspect was the killer all along. We were right, but we also can't say that we were right because we ended up trusting him over the course of the story. There's a very set out formula for whodunit movies: the person that you most suspect, the person that you least suspect, or
the person I most medium suspect.
And just about every murder mystery has done some sort of combination of these suspects. There aren't a whole lot of murder mysteries anymore because you have to find a way to surprise the audience, and that's a very hard thing to do because people are now so familiar with this genre. Enter Knives Out, which twists the whole formula, having the person you most suspect end up being the killer, but doing everything possible to make you think that the prime suspect couldn't be the killer. While I think the revelation was a bit overdone, it doesn't stop this from being an excellent twist on a story that has every single puzzle piece fit right where it should and start the potential legacy for an exciting, eccentric, and new detective, Benoit Blanc. And that's Knives Out. Let me know your thoughts on the movie in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and consider subscribing. If you've been around the channel before, then you might notice this video is a bit different from the other videos I've done, but if you like this style of editing with the recap and analysis bundled together, let me know that in the comments too. The feedback would be greatly appreciated. But anyways, if you want to see more videos like this on mystery movies or murder mysteries like Glass Onion or the Hercule Poirot movies, let me know that too. Subscribe for more, and if you do, I'll see you all in the next one.